Welcome to the,
Hold on.
sorry.
Hold on. Okay.
Okay, I want to welcome everyone to the June 20th Morris Township Planning Board meeting. Please take notice that in order to comply with the executive order signed by the governor and in an effort to follow best practices recommended by the CDC, the regular meeting of the Township of Morris Planning Board meeting is being held remotely via Zoom as well as in person at the Municipal Building, 50 Woodland Avenue, Morris Township, New Jersey. For all board members, board professionals, applicants, and/or their professionals, objectors, professionals, and all other members of the public. The legal notice required in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act has been satisfied, and a statement certifying same will be executed. I don't need to read this, correct? I just got to sign it. So everybody, please rise for pledge allegiance.
Pledge allegiance
to the flag
to the flag
of the
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Santiago, can you read our roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Nunn,
Here.
Mr. Jorfi,
Here.
Ms. Van Order,
Here,
Ms. Wilson,
Here,
Mr. Flowers,
Here.
is Ms. McKay? Okay, Mr. Benoit,
Here.
Mr. Alesso,
Here.
Mr. Warner,
Here.
Mr. Slate,
Here.
Mr. Phillips,
Here.
and I, Sonia Santiago, here.
Very good. Mr. Warner, I think at this time, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Mr. Benoit. As chairman remotely, he will take us through the Anner Management Resolution.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman, as you did recuse yourself from that matter. So we do have that resolution up for adoption. I did, Mr. Chairman Benoit, I did have a one correction. I was alerted to the fact that I neglected to mention in paragraph 3 that not only Deputy Mayor Wilson, but also Vice Chair Alesso recused himself from the hearing of this matter. So I would request that the resolution be amended to reflect same. Otherwise, I did not have any changes, and I hope it accurately memorializes the decision of the board as rendered a while back.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Warner. Any other board members with questions or comments on the resolution? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the resolution as amended.
I make a motion.
I'm sorry, who was that?
Chief Mike Nunn.
Chief Mike Nunn. Great, thank you.
Okay.
Second,
I believe it would have to be Mr. Flowers or
Mr. Benoit,
I can
Mr.
second
Benoit.
it. I'll second it.
okay.
I'll
We're
second it.
running it.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Sonia, on the roll call?
Mr. Nunn,
Yes.
Mr. Flowers,
Yes.
Mr. Benoit,
Yes.
so move.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn it back to Mr. Alesso.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next application is a the next item on the agenda is a resolution for the Red Bills Arena. I'll turn that over to the floor for a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion, Mr. Co-Chairman.
We have a motion from Chief Nunn. Can I get a second, please?
I'll second that, Tanya Van.
Second from Ms. Van Order. Thank you. Can we get a roll call order?
Mr. Nunn,
Yes.
Mr. Jorfi,
Yes.
Ms. Van Order,
Yes.
Ms. Wilson,
yes,
Mr. Benoit,
yes,
and Mr. Alesso.
Yes.
So move.
Okay. Moving right along, we have no applications to be heard tonight. I will turn the microphone over to Ms. Wilson for any legislative committee report.
I have no report this evening. I'm not sure if Mr. Jorfi has anything to add.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, for the 21-day notice bill, we had a meeting earlier this morning with the League of Municipalities. They have let us know they support that initiative in the Senate and will continue to help us out with that. So we will be sending out sample resolutions to neighboring municipalities in our area to have them also express their support to their state lawmakers. And we look forward to continuing to move this effort forward.
Great, it's great. Good work.
You're here.
Excellent. Let me turn the microphone over now to our engineer and our planner, Mr. Phillips and Mr. Slate, for a master plan overview discussion.
So in regard to one item on the master plan, Sonia did send out the new zoning map that we developed to replace the old hand-drawn zoning map. And in the next package, we're going to send hard copies out to everyone for everyone to review. And just by way of bringing everyone up to speed, we're comparing the two maps digitally, and the guy that's working on that for us is going to give us a list of all the changes that have occurred. We need to go through that with Steve and just see what we need to formally do as far as notice goes. So more to come on this. As I said, the next package will get you guys hard copies. You can look at that. If anyone has any comments, send an email to Sonia or myself, and then we'll be doing some more follow-up once we have some more data on the comparison of the old map and the new map. Just wanted to get that out in time for everyone to, ahead of time for everyone to do some review on it. And in regards to the master plan, there had some discussions with Chairman Benoit, related to that. And Ed, I didn't think you were going to be on tonight's meeting, so I was initially, going to punt on this, waiting for you to come back. But I guess you had some travel plans got canceled. What may be helpful is to have some background as to what what you were looking for, or any of the planning board members, as far as the master plan goes. We're in the middle of. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you can finish.
I was just going to say the law states that the master plan is redone every 10 years. Used to be, I think, 6 years, but a few years back they changed that. And we're in the middle of our 10-year period. Paul can kind of give some more background on that, but I didn't know if there were specific things that you wanted to get into, or what you were looking for, as far as like an overview goes, or if there's particular questions that Paul.
And Jim, I can give Ed, if it's appropriate, I could give sort of the board members an update or overview on the current status, and just embellish a little bit what Jim was saying, if you think that's appropriate.
I think that would be great. Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So the planning board adopted a master plan reexamination report back in 2017. So we're now in year 5, and as Jim correctly pointed out, there's nothing that is required statutorily for the planning board to take any action until 2027, when you must do another reexamination report in order to be in compliance with the provisions of the municipal land use law. And again, just to provide some context, there have been the actual last comprehensive master plan that was done in the township dates back to 1994. So, we're well past 25 years. And what's happened since that time is there have been a series of reexamination reports as required per statute. And as Jim pointed out, it used to be required that the reexamination take place every 6 years. Roughly a half a dozen years ago, that was changed to every 10 years. Now, I will say that there's nothing that precludes a board from undertaking a reexamination at any time during that interim period, during that 10-year period. There's nothing that precludes you from doing that. There's nothing that precludes you from basically adopting particular amendments to the master plan, as we've recently done, for example. And there's also nothing that would preclude you at any time in that period from deciding you needed to do a new master plan. Again, since a number of the planning board members weren't around back in 2017, what we did make some specific recommendations with regard to changes in both the master plan and development regulations. They're set forth in the document. We also proposed some changes in relation to, as I recall, circulation, open space, I think historic preservation, and I think conservation, and I think community facilities. We also, as part of that document, established an implementation schedule to implement those specific recommendations. And I think when we did that, we established a number of categories. I think we had short term that could be done in the first year or two, medium term, and then longer term that might be done within the course of the 10 years. And we also had, I think, a category of sort of ongoing, which really related to monitoring certain activities over the course of the 10 years. And again, this is all spelled out in the document. And perhaps, Ed, if you wanted there to be sort of a follow-up discussion about where we are and where we may be headed, I would suggest that the board members actually review that document. And then perhaps once that's done, we could set a time where we can have a sort of a follow-up discussion. If there are any questions, again, recognizing that there are board members that weren't members of the planning board 5 years ago. So that kind of gives you an overview of kind of where we're at in terms of the master plan.
Thank you, Paul. I mean, one thing I've noticed is that I noticed on the 2017 plan is that it tends to be more visionary than the 94 plan. And so as we just update a couple items, the lack of vision in the remaining items continues. And I think the way we're going, certainly with Madison Avenue Corridor and the way we as a board, I think, tend to think in terms of more visionary thing. And then maybe you can talk about the relationship between the master plan and the zoning. We've had a number of projects done recently where, and I'll point them out. And we've had the Honeywell project and the Colgate project. I'm going to add in the Dunkin' Donuts and even the Child Care Center where the zoning allows certain things, but it's not clearly tied to a vision of what we would like to see the town look like, what we would like the town to be. The zoning was changed, and yet we ended up with a Dunkin' Donuts. And now we're looking at potentially the Madison Hotel, and there's a zone there for OL5. Well, there's nothing in the zone that won't allow a Marriott to come in and plop a new hotel down there next to the Madison Hotel. It's within the zone, if I understand correctly. And Jim, you can correct me if I'm wrong. So I think that a proper vision will help to dictate or what's the word, inform the zoning. I know it's supposed to do that, but I think that having a better vision will help us to do that informing of the zoning. I hope that makes any sense, and board members are more than happy to tie in, to add to what I'm saying or to comment on it. But I think an understanding of the relationship between the plan and the zoning is something we should talk about and then kind of go on from there. Could you talk about that for a few minutes, Paul?
Yeah, so let me try and cover all the examples, Ed, that you brought up. First, with regard to Colgate and then Honeywell. Colgate actually was part of an area that was designated in need of redevelopment several years back. And then we proceeded to undertake a redevelopment plan, which, as you know, was amended as that redevelopment took shape. We also, as part of Colgate, actually conducted a master plan, adopted a master plan amendment to foster that redevelopment and establish from a policy perspective where what the planning board felt was an appropriate redevelopment scenario for that property. With regard to Honeywell, also, as you're well aware, we recently we had to amend the zoning ordinance to allow athletic training facilities on that property. The prior zoning, which was instituted roughly 10 years earlier for planned development, only allowed together with the residential office development. So we had to amend the zoning. And that too, as you recall, Ed, we did a master plan amendment to basically set forth the policy objectives and provide a basis for the governing body to then adopt the particular zoning changes that went in place to foster that new zoning that allowed for athletic training facilities. With regard to the issue of the Madison Avenue, there's sort of two issues you raised. One was the Dunkin' Donuts.
Paul, if
yeah.
I could stop you there for a moment, my apologies, but we just adopted that resolution this evening. 45-day period. So, but I know you know what to say and what not to say. So just a reminder.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say on Dunkin' Donuts, Steve, and this is a fact that was part of the record, was that we did institute a zoning amendment prior to Dunkin' Donuts application, which basically made it clear in the zoning that there was no appetite for drive-through service. And drive-through service being customers pulling up in a car and being served from a window in the building. That was a policy decision that the administration basically wanted to put in place, and we put that amendment in place. And from a use perspective, notwithstanding what anyone might feel about it, the Dunkin' Donuts application was basically conforming to the permitted uses in the ordinance, and I think there was only one or two bulk variances, as I recall. I think the larger issue, Ed, you raised on Madison Avenue envisioning, I think you're aware that the township is trying to get ahead of the curve on Madison Avenue, and EDAC in particular has been undertaking a study of the entire corridor, including as far as the township border and the Madison Hotel. And as part of that, there have been, there was an online survey where the results are being tabulated. We actually had a public visioning session that I think was actually quite successful to get input from residents of the township. And I will just tell you that one of the recommendations that I've left with the EDAC committee, because they've consulted me over the course of this process, is that there are a number of sites that, in my opinion, might be subject to redevelopment. It's a changing corridor, and that the EDAC really kind of needs to be proactive in terms of what it wants to see along the corridor from sort of a use and zoning perspective. So, and ultimately that made those recommendations by EDAC, I I have to believe are going to make themselves to the governing body and the planning board. So I think that covers the issues that you raised.
I appreciate, the examples you've given and your comments, particularly with Colgate and Honeywell. I understand those redevelopment projects, but without a master plan vision in place, such as the Madison Avenue visionary work being done by EDAC, it was easier not to pay attention to the details. What we have in the master plan, for example, we want to maintain the residential character of the neighborhoods. Well, what does that really mean? A visionary document might work better toward informing the zoning and informing future master plans and informing redevelopment sites and those changes in what it is that we really want. I really feel like people just come in and we're catching up and we end up with stuff that we don't want. And the corridor study is going to work toward stopping that, but that's only here on Madison Avenue. There's a lot more going on in the township and potentially other, development. So I think it's good that we're having this discussion. And I want to open up to other board members, but if you could just talk about how the master plan informs the zoning, that might help spark ideas in people's minds.
Well, again, as you know, the master plan, and particularly the land use element of the master plan, ultimately is the foundation for the underlying zoning. And it doesn't always work that way, but I think it's meant to work that way. And in a perfect world, it works out that way. And obviously, the planning board and the governing body are separate entities. And while they're largely on board from a policy perspective, it isn't always that way. But suffice it to say is the master plan serves as that framework for the implementing zoning. And it's basically the planning board giving recommendations to the governing body. And again, the land use element is the key. The only other thing that I would suggest, Ed, in answer to your sort of broader vision question beyond the Madison Avenue corridor, is that, if there are particular areas in the township, particular zones where, you think that, it may require some, further investigation, study, discussion with the planning board. Certainly the TCC and I would be happy to, weigh in and give advice on those issues, but really that needs to come from you as the chair and the rest of the planning board to kind of give direction, as to, what are the overriding issues in terms of, your particular vision for, the community or particular areas of the community. I mean, we're happy to help, but, and again, I think it would be helpful if we're going to have a follow-up discussion to kind of, for the board members to review that document, because it is the current, reexamination, and it does go into some detail about what some of the land use issues were and what some of the zoning recommendations were. But again, it's been 5 years hence, and I'm sure there are new issues that, could be discussed.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is exactly what I'm trying to say, which is that what the board wants to do in the future really is an amendment to the master plan. So they kind of go hand in hand. We need to do one anyway. I don't know whether you know what happened in 1994. Was it a whole new plan or was it a re-examination? If it was a whole new plan, do you know what sparked doing a whole new plan? And after you exactly say it's over 25 years, and maybe it's worth looking at doing a whole new plan. But
yeah,
I welcome comments from the other board members.
I have a few questions, comments.
Yes, no.
Okay, so I looked at the draft of the new zoning map that Jim sent out. And I looked at the Madison Avenue corridor, and I counted up, I think, 7 or 8 different zones along the Madison Avenue corridor. And I kind of read up on the zones. I was surprised at some of the things that were allowed in some of these zones. And so one of my questions is, with the visioning activities going on through EDACT about the Madison Avenue corridor, is it a possibility that there could be some kind of master plan amendment just focused on the Madison Avenue corridor? Is that even a possibility?
The short answer is absolutely yes.
Okay, so the way I see that is EDACT has begun the visioning process, so we have beginning ideas about the types of things that there's a pretty good degree of agreement upon in our community, of things that people would and would not like to see. And EDACT is doing further work on further refining the survey results. And the tentative word I've gotten is that the survey results align very well with the comments that were shared at the public meeting. So I guess my question there would be, like, what are the next steps? How do we go from the beginning ideas of visioning to a possible master plan amendment for the Madison Avenue corridor?
So I'll just jump in, and anyone else, Steve or Jim, can jump in as well. So I think, Kathy, as I had indicated in the times that I've met with and advised EDAC, what I always foresaw was that EDAC is going to make a series of recommendations regarding the future of that corridor. And, some of those recommendations are going to be sort of qualitative, and I think some of them are going to be more specific in terms of, what the vision is for the corridor, and particularly in terms of future uses. And one of the things that I think is important, as I've indicated, is, how does that future vision dovetail with the existing zoning? And right now you've got diverse, as you point out, you have diverse zoning, you have business zoning, you have office zoning, you have residential zoning, and you've got a changing corridor and changing, market along that corridor. So I would foresee and hope that as part of the EDAC recommendations, there would be some recommendations regarding the uses, and then ultimately translating into the zoning, which would, logically form the basis for a prospective master plan amendment, and also a prospective change in zoning that would be effectuated by the governing body.
And then, Paul, the anticipation would be that we would amend the land use plan element with respect to the corridor, and then adopt appropriate implementation ordinances with respect to uses that would be consistent therewith.
Yeah,
We don't
and
adopt, but the
again,
governing body would adopt it.
Yeah, obviously, Steve, we're both sort of presuming that the level of recommendation with regard to uses and specific zoning changes would rise to the level where you would need a master plan amendment. And, you got to go back to look at the history of what does the master plan say about this corridor in 1994, and then in the subsequent reexaminations. But yes, presumably it would lead to an amendment covering those land use categories and zoning districts along the corridor.
Okay, let me ask a couple of questions about the zones that are there now. There's a couple of spots that are zoned OL 40. And my understanding was that OL 40 means that there's 40 acres, right? So that a question would be, how do you have an OL 40 on Madison Avenue if it's not 40 acres?
So I'd have to, and Jim, you can weigh in on this, but, and I don't have a copy of the zoning map in front of me. I can pull it up, but my recollection was that the bulk of the office classifications along the corridor were OL5.
Yes, there's more OL5, but there's one small OL40.
Do you know which property that is?
I
Kathy?
don't. That was a question I had, like, what property is this?
Yeah, 'cause that kind of doesn't make sense intuitively, but I don't know, Jim, can you weigh in on that?
You know what? I don't have the map in front of me. The only thing that comes to mind is the J.C. P&L property, but you know, it doesn't make sense that would be OL40 along that corridor.
Yeah,
No.
It's in back of the B11 zone. And then the bulk is OL5. And there's R11, there's some OSGU, RG5. So there's, there's several zones along
Yeah.
Madison Avenue.
But the OL40, does it touch on Madison Avenue? It sounds like it may be on Old Turnpike Road and not the Madison Avenue corridor.
I don't know. It's hard for me to tell. It's like a little square off of the R11.
Jim,
Or
it's
the
at the
B11.
corner of Prescott and Old Turnpike, it looks like.
And that's the old Honeywell, you know.
I was gonna say, that's Honeywell, yeah.
yeah, I think that's part of Honeywell. I agree.
And is that considered part of the Madison Avenue corridor? I mean, that's on the other side of the railroad tracks. I'm not part of
I
that EDAP.
couldn't tell from the map exactly where, so maybe I misread that, but I couldn't tell exactly where the Madison Avenue Road itself was.
You're right, Jim, that's Honeywell.
So if we have properties around the town, for example, I know that I've heard residents bring up that the Cube Smart on Columbia is zoned OL40, but it's not 40 acres. So that's another example. So what do we do in cases like that? Do we, I mean, I guess there's some history there as to how that zone got associated with that property, right? And when we look at the zoning map, do we just accept situations like that, or do we make changes to reflect the fact that, for example, it doesn't have 40 acres?
I recall that came up during the application for the Cube Smart behind, with the Board of Adjustment. But I don't remember the specific, what the specific research found on that, that particular parcel. I think it may have been something along the lines that they thought that Honeywell, would kind of consume that into their, I'll say the mother lot, the 147 acres that they own. But, don't hold me to that.
Okay, well, there's certain uses associated with OL40 that, that sort of comes with the zone, right? And if something is zoned OL40 and the uses don't comply with some of the parameters of OL40, it feels kind of like there's a mismatch. And I'm not sure how we correct that.
If I may, just generally speaking, and Paul, feel free to jump in and bail me out as soon as possible, but it's not uncommon to have pre-existing situations where, they don't comport with the current zoning ordinance. And also, I think what we're talking about here is an anticipation that many of the zones along the corridor may not be appropriate and may ultimately be desired to be modified. But you never have a perfect match. There's always pre-existing nonconformities, lot sizes, use, and the like. But I think that's what the general issue we're talking about here is in going through the corridor. We're going to have a general idea as to modifications that may wish to be made to the land use element of the master plan to foster ordinances to change the zoning which I think is sometimes referred to, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, as redevelopment with a small r, as opposed to redevelopment with a big R.
Ah,
Correct.
Not an area in need of redevelopment, but simply if you modify the zoning, perhaps they will come.
and that is within the like, that could be recommended by the planning board?
In we're the gatekeepers of the
Absolutely.
master plan, yep.
Wow.
So
That's
we sort of,
interesting.
we sort of set the tone, if you will, and the governing
Well,
body would
Kathy, I mean,
introduce the
just
ordinances.
in kind of just by way of illustration, you could have this zone or zones along the corridor that you look at the list of permitted uses and then you look at the trends and what's happening and what the vision may be, and there may be a mismatch. And you may want to promote redevelopment of certain properties. And we all know that a number of properties, went vacant. And the market has changed and so forth. That's what planning and zoning is to kind of to look at what's appropriate, look at what's around it, what's the surrounding land use context, what are market trends, and what's the recommendation with regard to future uses that kind of meets the balance of the needs of the marketplace with trying to afford protection to the surrounding uses and particularly the residential uses.
Yes.
So, I mean, that happens all the time. So I agree with Steve, looking at small R redevelopment type uses is something that this board can obviously do and probably should do.
Yes, I did notice in reading over the OL5 that it does permit warehouses. I never knew that before. If it's tied with an office or business. So
Yeah, but I think that's the key to it, because, and I can go look at it, but basically the intent was in the OL zones, the only warehousing that was contemplated, envisioned, allowed was warehousing that was clearly ancillary and only a small percentage of the office use, as opposed to the I-21 zone, which is your one zone, which does allow, exclusively 100% warehouse distribution, wholesale type buildings.
okay. All right, thanks. And one other question that came up for me in connection, thinking about the Madison Avenue corridor. The question came up on one of the recent applications. We don't allow drive-in or drive-through restaurants, but somehow connected with that, we also do not allow outdoor dining, right?
Yeah, that's a good point, Kathy. That came up during the hearing on the Dunkin' Donuts application. And I think I pointed out, because I researched it, there's sort of a quirk in the underlying definition of drive-in restaurant, which stayed when we amended the ordinance to preclude the drive-through window service. And the way you literally read it, it would preclude sort of outdoor dining.
Right.
And what I had said at the time was, I'm not sure that was the intent.
I
And I
don't
will
think
just
it
tell you
was.
my own opinion that, given the particular circumstances, I think outdoor dining can be a really good thing. And that's something that we may not want to preclude, and that's something that we may want to tweak in terms of the, any overall changes to the corridor, and particularly that zone, which I think is B11.
Yeah. Okay. So those were some of the questions that came up to me regarding the Madison Ave corridor. Other things too, but just sticking on that, those were my questions.
So Paul, if I could jump in here, I think that your point on the zoning changes recommended by the master plan is spot on. And that goes to my comment about relationship between the master plan and the zone. And the fact that we can look at areas of the town and say the trends are going this way, and we think we'd like to rezone something. And I think that that's an important component of what this board does with the master plan. And so that's, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's kind of one of the things I think of when I think of master planning.
Yeah.
And
I
I
agree.
feel like the timing and is right for us to really look at the Madison Avenue with all the visioning work that EDAC's doing and the transition in going on and, you know, various parcels under consideration. I think taking a look at Madison Avenue, the time is now.
Okay, does it make sense for us to move forward with getting together a work session for us to actually take this to the next level? And we're asking some questions, but it sounds like everybody's eager to get started on looking at the master plan and possibly having a revision.
Paul, did you think it made sense, if I may, Mr. Chairman, to wait for EDAC and get it through the TCC so that it can be things can be presented to the board in an orderly, efficient manner?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree, Steve. There should be coordination with the work the EDAC's doing, and EDAC's, you know, well into this and is heavily invested in it. Kathy, I'm not sure, you know, I know what the EDAC timing is, other than I know they want this to move forward in an expeditious fashion. But what I wouldn't want is that, you know, two separate entities sort of working at cross purposes, if you will, which I think is where Steve's coming from. So, you know, I guess provided that you know, EDAC is going to, you know, prepare its report and recommendations in a timely fashion, probably the prudent thing might be to wait, as I think Steve is intimating. And that also doesn't preclude the planning board from giving its own independent, you know, opinions, analysis, recommendations, you know, over and above what's in the EDAC report. And ultimately, you know, presumably would all go to the governing body to consider as part of, again, an implementing zoning. But that, you know, that's not my decision.
Well,
Question-
I'm the liaison from the governing body to EDAC, so I'm familiar with their work. And I don't know, I see this project as it overlaps. That's part of why I've invited people from the other boards to attend the EDAC meetings to kind of, you know, see for themselves what's going on and kind of, I call it pollinate ideas. I don't know I mean, I'm attending the EDAC meetings. If somebody from the planning board, if the chair or vice chair or both wanted to attend, and I mean,
I think Kathy-
I can see a place for coordination, you know, as the process is unfolding, or not. I mean, I guess
Kathy,
it's a
I
decision
think-
point there.
Kathy, I think Ed and I have agreed to make ourselves available. We had a little hiccup the other night, but I think we'll make ourselves available to be on the EDAC meetings so that we know what's going on. But based on what Paul said, I'm going to go with the latter comment that Paul made, because I think there's interest on the planning board members for us to get together and have a discussion. And maybe we can have that discussion while EDAC's working on its plan. How about a quick straw poll? Everybody just quick raise your hand. if
Can
you
I,
think
can I
that-
weigh in on this? Because
Sure.
I think it's a mistake. The EDAC process has been going on for quite a while. I think it's a mistake for now the planning board to jump into the middle of that and all of a sudden start to provide their input. I think the EDAC process needs to go forward. I don't know how that, you know, was planned, but are they going to be reporting to the planning board? Or are they going to be reporting to the township committee? To have the planning board start, you know, kind of come into the middle of that, I think that's a mistake. I think they should be part of the process, but I don't think the planning board should be starting their own Madison Avenue corridor kind of look at or ideas, if you know what I mean. And that's what, maybe that's not what was envisioned, but I think the EDAC process is moving. That needs to continue to move forward, and that information is going to filter back to the planning board, and then the planning board is going to discuss it at that point. And maybe the chairman and the vice chair, you know, should start to get involved with the EDAC process. Am I missing something? I don't think we should have two
Jim,
people
so
doing the same
you're
thing.
not objecting to Ed and Joe attending the EDAC meetings where the discussions of this will be taking place. You're not objecting to that?
No, no, not at all. I think that's beneficial, but I don't think the whole
Yeah.
planning board should be, looking at Madison Avenue until they get this, this bit's going on for years. It needs to finish that process and move it along.
Yeah, but no,
But Ed
what I'm suggesting is it might make sense for Ed and I, if we're going to be sitting in on EDAC meetings, to get a sense of what the other planning board members have in mind. And I don't know that if Mr. Warner, if that could be done in closed session or whether that needs to be done in the public. But I think that it might help us if the 9 or 13 of us got together, for a quick hour and just talked about it so that we're all kind of familiar and talking freely. Maybe we can get in a room at that point, not have to do this over a Zoom call.
Well,
That's what
Joe,
I'm suggesting.
If I could, we're kind of at the point where once EDAC has their recommendations, they can, and we'll be part of that discussion, and Kathy's part of that discussion. Once they're finalized, they can sort of pass it off to us, and at that point, we can have the planning board component of that initiative. And I don't think we're that far away from that point. So I think if it goes from the EDAC to the planning board to the township committee with everyone being involved, I think, as Jim says, that'll be like the smoothest transition. And that way we can be sure that we don't put some sort of hiccup into what the EDAC is doing. Does it make sense?
Okay, maybe, Mr. Chairman, maybe we just do a quick straw poll to see if we want to get together and chat or whether we want to wait. So let me throw out there a quick straw poll to get together and chat, and we get some ayes or nays.
Well, we
Wait,
would
so
need to
Joe,
schedule
so
a
what,
meeting.
Joe, are you suggesting that the planning board have a discussion? Are you focused just on Madison Avenue, or are you talking about, you're talking just about Madison Avenue, right?
I'm talking about Madison Avenue because it sounds like there's some interest in having a discussion, and it'd be good for Ed and I to have an idea of what the rest of you feel before we, make a comment that might just be Ed or I, one of our comments. That I just think that that's a healthy thing for us to do, to have a quick, little communication.
So in
among
other
the
words,
group.
touch base with the planning board to get planning board members' thoughts about Madison Avenue, knowing
Exactly.
that EDACT is doing their work, and it would be sort of background for you and Ed as you participate in the EDACT meetings, which
Exactly.
okay.
I just think it's helpful. I mean, I don't know if you agree or disagree, Ed. I think it just might be helpful for us to get an idea of what the other planning board members are thinking about, and just do it in an informal, quick type, meeting with us all in person, so we're not playing with the Zoom challenges.
If we're going to do it all in person, well, however we're going to do it, if it's a quorum, it's a public meeting.
Right,
Uh,
right. And as I said,
All right, forget about it.
I'm happy just waiting to see what that gives us and going from there.
We'll just wait. We'll just wait.
Just go to the meeting.
That makes sense. Ed and I can go to the meetings and we'll just report as part of new business.
Okay.
Is
All
there
right,
any
so-
other, does anyone else want to say anything else before we move toward a closing of the meeting?
I just had two things, if I may, Mr. Chairman. One,
Of course.
I think we're going next to public comment, and I did see someone in the attendees with a hand raised. I don't know if they wish to make a public comment or not when we get there. But number two, I do have to step out. My colleague is going to, Matt Flynn will be joining for the balance of the meeting, however long it is. It may not be that long. So I just wanted to alert everyone to that. My apologies for having to step out.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Warner.
Okay, sure.
Mr. Lesso, could I ask one last question before?
Of course.
This just came up for me reviewing the zoning map. We have, can someone explain why we have so many single-family residential zones? I mean, I counted, I don't know, 7 or 8 of them. Is there a reason for that?
Well,
Do you
Mr.
know,
Phillips,
Paul?
you'd probably be best to take that question on.
Yeah, I mean, I think the simplest answer, Kathy, is that it's more often than not tied to the minimum lot size. And you have a variety of lot sizes, within your various residential districts. And there are sort of thresholds in terms of lot size, like R15, R25, R35, and so forth. And you're trying to find the right balance to both reflect the established character in terms of lot sizes, as well as to provide for what's an appropriate minimum lot size, again, given the built context of the adjacent neighborhood. So it's sort of it's a balance. So what you wouldn't want to do, for example, is, if there's a lot of lot sizes in the 25,000 square foot range, you wouldn't want to just have an R15 and an R35, if that makes sense. You really want to capture, again, what's the prevailing lot size within a particular neighborhood, and also establish that minimum so that you don't get people who are building or knocking down or subdividing building lots that don't reflect that character, in order to protect the integrity of that neighborhood, if that makes sense to you.
Okay. I guess I didn't notice the size difference when I was reading through I noticed, for example, RA 15 allows hospitals as a use, and most of them say everything that RA 130
Right.
allows.
Yeah.
And then, so it's like, it's sort of, I guess I have to read them more carefully.
Well, I think with that issue, there are certain uses that are deemed sort of universally appropriate within single-family districts, such as schools, for example. Very often you find churches, and typically those uses, as well as like a hospital use, is regulated as a conditional use in a residential district with a separate set of conditions. But I think in answer to your initial question, it's really tied to, what's the established lot size within these underlying districts, and what's that right balance in terms of establishing districts. You wouldn't want to just have, an RA 15 and an RA 40, because there's too much to lose in between. And you're either going to get people coming in and building lots that are sort of too big or too small. So it's kind of finding that balance, if you will.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to say, I think conversations like this are really helpful. So I appreciate that we had the time to do this. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else before I move to the public?
One other thing. So I understand, Jim, you're going to send us more information to prepare for the next steps?
So I'm going to send, Sonia's going to send out with the next package, the zoning map existing and the new one, but I don't know when we're going to discuss that next. Paul and Steve and I need to get together and look at, how we're going to handle a notice, because it's my understanding that technically, if a zone changed, we need to notify everyone within that zone. And some zone lines just got corrected. There was a number of changes that came about. I mean, this thing's been in the works for more than 10 years, probably been 15 years. There was a lot of data that got cleaned up in the assessor's data. And, from talking to Steve, it sounds like we need to do certified mail notice. And, I'm not quite sure how that's going to happen. I mean, it may come down that it's easier to give every resident in the township certified mail notice. I hope that doesn't happen, but kind of like what we're struggling with.
Okay.
Wow.
There's other ways to, handle that. But I need to get this data from the GIS guy for the comparison. So that's the main thing. This has been ongoing, and want to, move this zone map forward.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. We're going to open the meeting now to the public. I see someone with their hand raised. Do you want to admit them so that they can ask their question?
Hi, this is Brian. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, sir. Give us your full name and your address, please.
Yeah, this is Brian Morgan, 24 Green Knolls Road. So I actually had a couple questions, and because of the discussion that was being held, I actually had a third question. So I'm not sure if I have to get back in queue for that. But found it very interesting, the discussion on the updated zoning map. I'm just curious, what's the process of making that public? At what point is that going to be, say, published online versus the old hand-drawn one that's out there?
Okay, you want to?
I'm not sure if I have to ask all my questions front or,
Excuse me, but before we answer your question, could you just state your name again and spell your last name for our board secretary?
sure, it's Brian, Brian, Morgan, Morgan. At
Thank you
24
very much, sir.
24 Green Knolls Road.
And now, I'm not sure who would answer that question, Jim or Paul?
That's a question I may ask Steve, but,
He's
I'd
right
say-
back. I'm sorry. I was able to jump back in. My apologies. I didn't hear the question, but if you could repeat it,
Sure.
there's a fair
So the
chance I might be
question
able
is,
to answer it.
yeah, I've been looking at the zoning map a bit lately, and I was just curious. I had no idea that there was going to be a new one coming out, and great to hear that it's been 10 years in the works, because I find some challenges reading the old one. Is what's the process to make that public? So roughly when will that be published online for us to the general public to view?
The new map?
The new map, yeah. I
the-
just heard
the-
that there's
the-
going to be a new zoning map.
Yeah, well, if and when there is a new zoning map, and it's a fair bet there would be modifications, I think, to the existing one. It's an ordinance process. So ultimately, the ordinance will be introduced by the governing body. Our board, the planning board, will master plan consistency review it. And then it would be adopted on second read, presumably by the governing body. And that is a public hearing before the governing body. So at the very least, all members of the public would have an opportunity to weigh in at the public hearing prior to the adoption of the ordinance amending the zoning map or replacing it with a new, our zoning map with a new map. That said, it's entirely possible that throughout the process, as you may have heard earlier, with some other potential changes in our master plan and what have you, there may be other more informal opportunities for members of the public even to discuss zoning map changes prior to an actual public hearing before the governing body adopting the ordinance. It's not necessarily provided for in the municipal land use law, but as a practical matter, it may well occur.
Got it.
If
That
that
could be
helps.
a long ways off unless it's informally. So yeah, no,
Yeah.
that does.
And Brian, just by way of some more background, what we did was take our existing map and now it's a digital map.
Yeah.
There's not wholesale changes all over the place. It's it's really a cleanup of, there was subdivisions, there were lot line adjustments and all that sort of stuff. So it basically reflects the old map, but there's cleanup.
That's fantastic. I think it might be easier to read rather than zooming in on that old hand-drawn one, which is very difficult sometimes with the scribble in there.
Definitely easier to read. You can zoom in. It's electronic. It's 100% better.
Okay, excellent. So a second question on that, and then like I said, I have a third one that maybe I could have to get back in queue. But the second question is really my primary question was about, again, it just wind up being, you guys were basically addressing similar questions that I was having. But effectively, you talked a lot about the process by which the planning board looks to correct zoning or influence zoning. But what's the process for concerned concerned residents about updating a zoning that they feel is incorrect? And so, yeah, I'll ask that question, then I can follow up with two specific examples, but just what is the procedure for a concerned resident that's not on the planning board?
Steve, could you answer that question?
Paul, can you answer?
I can take a shot at it if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, please.
No.
Well, look, there's two potential venues. If there were if you felt there were a serious zoning issue or discrepancy or problem, you certainly could raise that at the governing body level during the, public comment session of the governing body. Say, I'm a resident, here's some particular zoning issues that I, feel that need to be addressed. And the governing body will act, accordingly. And the governing body could also, potentially ask the planning board to study it. Very often that kind of action happens. And then the other thing is you always have a voice, as Steve pointed out, whenever there is a master plan amendment being considered where the public is noticed and there's a public hearing. you can speak at that point, and also when a implementing ordinance is being entertained, that's required as part of a second reading that there be a public hearing. So there's a voice at that stage as well. But my sense is you're trying to see whether there's a way for you to raise particular zoning issues, ahead of time and sort of be a bit more proactive. I think that's the way to do that. I welcome Steve's comments if he has anything to add.
No, I mean, procedure, you're in essence, I guess, referring to a type of zone change request, perhaps, but certainly bring it to the governing body's attention is appropriate, and it's not uncommon, as Paul said, for the governing body to then task the planning board, if it rises to that level in the governing body's minds, to look into it, maybe make a recommendation, and maybe even pursue together with the governing body a change in that zoning.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. I did have one more question. I'm not sure if I have to go back in queue.
No, you don't have to go back in queue,
Okay.
Mr. Morgan. Go ahead and
I
ask it.
appreciate it. Yeah, I'll be quick. So just real quick, I want to commend the chairman and deputy mayor Wilson for talking and proposing the smart planning and talking about the master plan. I think that's fantastic. Really excited to hear that. I just did have a question to Mr. Phillips. You said that statutorily, I forget the word you used, statutory, we're in compliance because of the master plan, because it's not due for every 10 years. But I am aware that there was some, again, specifically from an environmental point of view, February 4th, 2021, Governor Murphy signed into law PL 2021 C6, basically about a, what is it called? A municipal climate vulnerability.
Yes.
And then since then, there's also been stormwater management. I think we might have had an amendment for stormwater management. Just want to know what the township is doing about those two areas and making sure that they're accommodated, or what is the requirement around making sure the township is within just within the legal requirements of what's being asked there.
So, and Steve, you can weigh in on this as well, but I think the amendment that you cite with regard to the climate change issue, one of the requirements, as I understand that legislation, is that, if the planning board undertakes a update or revision or total overhaul of the land use element, then that has to be addressed as set forth in the amendment as part of that land use element update. So, you're not required to do anything until that's revisited at the time of whenever that next master plan reexamination is. But if there's going to be an overhaul or change to the land use element in the intervening period, it has to be addressed at that time, as I read that change to the statute. Steve, you want to weigh in?
No. Well, only to agree with you. And I'm candidly forgetting the exact word, but the climate assessment vulnerability, if I recall correctly, is what we're talking about. Yes, it's passive in the sense that there's not an affirmative obligation until, it's not an unless and until, because as we know, we have to every 10 years at least do a master plan reexamination. So it's until we undertake to do a master plan reexamination or an amendment of the land use element that we have that obligation comes upon us as well. The other one, the stormwater, that's DEP regulations that back in March of 2021 were updated, and currently, maybe Jim could correct me where I'm wrong, but it looked as if the emergency rulemaking was going to be expedited, and we were going to get new DEP flood hazard area and flood elevation requirements in mid-June. And then last I heard, the brakes were put on a bit on that. But the long and the short of the DEP stormwater and flood elevation changes is that's not requiring us as a border municipality to amend our master plan or necessarily implement any ordinances. That's just requires compliance with DEP regulations for all applications.
Great. Yeah, so just to recap, so just so I'm clear, so that climate vulnerability one will only be addressed, will only need to be addressed at the next, the 10-year anniversary of the next revision, or
Well-
unless the land use section is revamped. Is that
Well,
correct?
yeah, well, I was gonna say though, not, or if before the 10-year expiration, we undertake to do a master plan.
That's what he
re-exam or-
just said,
Yeah.
Steve.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't hear if he said but it's not just at the 10 years. It's as soon as we do it within the next
Yeah.
5. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much. That was everything.
Sure.
Thank you for your time.
Great, great. Thank you. I see another hand raised. Can we admit, I don't know the name.
Hello, it is Sue Sarcelli, S is in Sam, AUCHELLI, representing 9 Green Knolls Road.
Great,
And,
welcome. What's your
I agree.
question?
I agree with Mr. Benoit that you need to have some kind of a visionary document in your master plan. But as he was defining, he was like, what is it that what we really want? It's not what you really want. It's what the residents of this town really want. I was part of the EDAC survey, and when all the groups came back and reviewed what they wanted and what came up, over and over, Dunkin' Donuts was brought up as a negative example. And yet during the Dunkin' Donuts talks, and that night where that meeting was, people asked, almost pleaded, that you wait until the EDAC results came out with our vision of what we want that area to be prior to Dunkin' Donuts being the decision. And even though there were 2 dissenting votes from that board that night, the Dunkin' Donuts still got passed. So my question is, when are you going to start to listen to the people who, number one, who live in the area, and the people who were on that EDAC? Listen to them and let them be the guiding factor for this visionary document. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We go on to the next.
No.
Excuse me? I'm sorry.
Sure.
No, unmute her, please. I'm sorry, Mr. Celli. Did you have another question?
I'm sorry. My question was, when are you going to allow the EDAC results to be the influencing factor for the visionary document instead of what you think the vision should be? Same thing with Normandy Parkway. A lot of people are saying they don't want it, and yet you just keep still pushing for it. Same thing.
I'm not familiar with Normandy Parkway.
Oh, well, with Normandy Parkway, the vast majority of the residents on Normandy Parkway and also within Green Knolls Road and Featherly and surrounding areas have all said that putting up a sidewalk on Normandy Parkway is just not the proper thing to do. We want to try to keep it historically the way it is. And that's what the people are saying. And yet your township is still pushing for a sidewalk.
Yeah,
It's things like that where we need to be heard. And I want to know, when are you going to start letting the EDAC talk?
Yeah, Ms. Sarcelli, let me give you just 2 pieces of information. The sidewalk is an issue that if you feel strongly against, you should let the township council know that. It's not really a planning board issue. And as far as listening to EDAC, we just talked about tonight that was going to be our next step, was to let EDAC publish its report, and then we would be guided by it. And I also believe that we have certain requirements as a planning board, that whatever ordinances are in place, we have to allow land use, and we have to judge it based upon the ordinance that's in place. So you might not like the Dunkin' Donuts, and maybe some of the planning board members did not like the Dunkin' Donuts and voted against it. But other planning board members felt that it met the threshold that was required by the existing ordinance. So
All right, fair enough.
we hear you, you've made your point, and I think all the
Thank you.
planning board members heard it and really appreciate it and respect it. So thank you so
And-
much. Thank you.
Yes, and I thank you for that. Fair enough. I thank you for your answer. And I as much respect that answer too. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Remember, all of us live in Morris Township. We all have the same common goal. Next. Ms. Collins, if you'll just give us your name, full name, spell out your last name and your address, please.
Certainly. Patricia Collins, Collins, 4 Green Knolls Road. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for all this great information. It's so helpful to us because sometimes we have felt that we've been left in the dark. And on that note, though, I'd just like to commend Mayor Gioffi because he listened to us and he's applying to the state to try to get the 200-foot rule and the 10-day rule extended. And it might not happen because the state, there's a lot of communities in the state, but at least they thank you for listening to us and for working on this. And I appreciate the comment, by the way, and I don't know if it was Mr. Warner or whomever raised the question that if we can put in a request, all we have to do is raise the request at the governing body. So I'm going to do that right now, if I may, and if it's the right process.
It's
And-
not, I'm sorry, ma'am, it's not the right time or the right process.
It isn't.
This is, as a planning board, obviously you have 2 members of the governing body as members of the planning board. So they've heard you. So when you do get to go to the next council meeting to raise this, they'll be warned already that you're coming and graciously listen to your comment.
Excellent, appreciated, because what I'm requesting is, and I'm piggybacking, by the way, off of Brian Morgan's comments, because we live in the same neighborhood. And we had major issues because the zoning was incorrect on 99 Columbia, and that's what we want changed. It was listed as an old 40, and the parcel is only 3.69 acres. So it's clearly residential. In fact, we knew the people who lived there for years and years and years and years. And when somebody else bought it, he used an old map of OL 40, even though it should be a residential map. And based on that, now I know that's not your purview, it's the purview of the Board of Adjustment, but there were variances that were used applying to an OL 40, and that would have been totally different if they were variances for a residential area. But the result was a monstrosity is in our neighborhood, in our backyard. But now that it's built, we would at least like to find out how we can enforce some of the variances that had limits on them, but they were never enforced. I'll just give you 3 examples. The trees, for instance, 2/3 of the acreage were completely defoliated, 100-plus-year-old trees, magnificent trees. And the builder promised to put in 118. Well, that certainly fell short and no one enforced it. Setbacks were not enforced. The frontage from Columbia back should have been 300 feet. They got a variance for 99.6 and they built right up to 82 feet. The signage should be 150 feet back. It's 30 feet. So my question to you, and even if it's not your purview, could someone please point me in the right direction?
Yes, let me do that.
Who do I contact? Who do I contact?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Steve Warner, if I may, I'll try to field the
Thank you.
Ms. Collins' question.
Thank you.
With your permission, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, of course, Mr. Warner.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
First of all, whatever zoning board, I'm not familiar because I'm the planning board attorney, but whatever
Right.
zoning board approval occurred, there would be a resolution of approval that would list all the conditions that you're referring to.
Mhm.
And the zoning officer and or others can handle enforcement. I suspect Jim Slate jotted down some notes and he may not have been the only one. And someone no doubt can look into that to ensure that there's compliance with that resolution.
Yeah, Mr. Warner, if I may say though, my neighbors, not me particular, they've complained many times about the trees and to no avail. So that's why I'm wondering, do we have to go before a formal board and make a
Well,
formal
the planning
listing?
board certainly, unfortunately, the planning board cannot be it. But the compliance is handled by the administration in the municipality, in the township. And I don't mean to put Jim Slate on the spot, but as the engineer, and I'm sure he can communicate it to the zoning officer to double check to make sure that compliance, that the resolution is being complied with, or if it's not, there are appropriate actions that can be taken. with respect to same.
What
But I don't have
actions-
specific information, but he's gonna have to look into that. That's that one. The other thing is you mentioned about you believe a zone not to be accurate, if you will, and again, zones don't always, things pre-exist zones. So something could have been designated a certain zone, OL 40 after something else already existed and the size was less than 40 acres. But what you're talking about there, if you want to make a request, you can make a request to the governing body for a zone change. If you
That's what
think
I'm
that
going to do.
particular lot, for the reasons you state, should be zoned differently prospectively, and that's a possibility, but that has to be something that's pursued by the governing body, and ultimately could only be done by ordinance, and the governing body will decide if it wishes to have the planning board weigh in on the request. There's no formal MLUL procedure for zone requests, but generally it's made to the governing body, and more often than not, if it warrants it, the governing body refers it to the planning board.
Thank you, but can I ask you one more question? If Mr. Phillips had said before that a zoning amendment was made at Honeywell, in other words, to change it from a PUD to a training center. So I was just thinking.
Oh, no, that was a general development plan. No, that was something different, Ms. Collins said, and I apologize. I know it's very complicated stuff. That was a general development plan that had already existed, and there were already approvals. And that was an application to amend a general development plan, not a zoning ordinance, something completely different.
All right.
And
Well,
that is
thank
done
you.
by the planning board.
Okay, and thank you. And, we appreciate this because it is complicated. And, as a taxpayer, I'm living here for 40-something years. So I'm getting educated on it. We all are, and we appreciate the inclusion that we're getting. So
Okay,
thank you for that.
Please hold on 1 second. Mr. Slate, could you give Ms. Collins a phone number to call Mr. Hanson tomorrow?
I just want to kind of give some background on here. So when the site, a number of variances were obviously granted. The front yard setback was granted. The building was constructed. An as-built plan is submitted, and it's confirmed that the setbacks meet the requirements that were granted as part of the variance. The signage, there was variances granted for the setback of the sign, and the sign was built in conformance with the approval granted by the Board of Adjustment, and the number of trees that were planted in accordance with our ordinance, were planted at the time. I did recently have a discussion with Mr. Hanson, and I noted that there were a number of trees that died and need to be replaced over there. So that's an ongoing enforcement issue.
Well, can I just ask you then, Mr. Slate, if they got a variance for 99.6 feet as opposed to 300, but yet one of my neighbors did a Google site, but it's only 82. So shouldn't they get a fine because they overstepped their 99.6?
Well, Google Maps is not an accurate measuring device. I mean, we get a licensed land surveyor to give us the setback from the right of way, and that's what we use. You can't use Google Maps to measure accurately.
Could someone in your office confirm that for us, just to put us at ease, because this has been a very upsetting experience for
I
all
can
of us.
confirm that with certainty right now that building is constructed in accordance with the approval.
Which is 99.6, you're saying?
I don't know the number offhand, but whatever's in the resolution of approval, they met that.
But could someone just confirm that it is 99.6 and not 82? I would appreciate that.
I'd say, why don't you call my office and we can follow up and get you that information.
That is terrific. Would you like that like in writing in letter form? Would that be easier?
You can call, you can email, you can write.
Jim, why don't we just, for convenience for her, just give her a phone number that she can call tomorrow and ask the question. I'm sure she'll be comfortable if somebody looks at it tomorrow and answers her question. You just give her a phone number.
You ready for the number?
I am, thank you.
973
Mm-hmm.
326
I'm sorry, 321?
326
Okay,
7440 is the number in the engineering department.
engineering. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to be heard? Seeing none, I'm going to take a motion to, wait, sorry. Is there anything that we have to discuss in closed session?
No.
Okay, then we'll take a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion, we adjourn tonight's meeting.
Need a second?
Ed, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.